I really want to make light of what you do right now before we get into the questions, because I think it's so important for solopreneurs to niche down. And you have done that, and you've done that very well. And you help Gen X women who've been laid off, frustrated, burned out, whatever, and you help them build coaching and consulting businesses, so they have better work-life balance and more financial opportunity and the works that all of us women are kind of go up against sometimes. But you do focus on Gen X specifically. So I want to know, when you were starting your business, why did you start there? What was it about this group? What called you to this audience?
That is a great question. So, first of all, I'm one of them. So, I find that generation very relatable. And we are a small generation, and we're generally, disgruntled and in a bad mood because we feel like nobody ever pays attention to us. So, it's definitely a generation I could relate to. But no, why I really did it was during the pandemic. I was between gigs myself. I had just gotten out of a venture-backed startup that had sold, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, and the pandemic hit, and, honestly, it really slowed me down. I had kids come home from college. One, was home in high school, but at home, and, I just didn't know what I wanted to do next, but I knew I didn't wanna go back to another startup. I was tired of raising money. I was tired of that. It's its own grind, and it has pros and cons, but I wanted to break. And so I joined a women's kind of entrepreneurial community here, and yeah, online, obviously, and was listening to a lot of women who um, were impacted by ageism, frankly. And also there were a lot of layoffs during that time of the pandemic. And these women were so talented, just incredible backgrounds, lots of corporate experience, and they were just being sidelined. And so they were trying to start their own businesses. And the skills that make you a great coach or a consultant that you can bring to the table are not the same skills that make you a great business person. It is actually a different skill set. And that's when I put the two things together. I said, well, I have that skill set. And I'm also a former professor of entrepreneurship, so I love to teach. And I said, wow, I wonder if there's a business here where I could share my knowledge and help these women sort of keep their talents and their expertise in circulation for longer and make some money while they're doing it.
You know what I love? Like we talked about the niching down, but you've niched down on a particular gender, on a particular problem. I'm sorry, a particular phase of life. Older. You're saying older Gen X women.
Yeah, 45 to 60.
So you've got it. Yeah. So, and then you've niched down on a pain point. So you've really got the trifecta, which, is not as common as it probably should be. That's just awesome.
Well, I was mentioning it before. It's one of those things that I think you've got to get heard, especially when your business is young, and mine is young. And it is really hard to cut through the noise unless you can, the metaphor that's coming to mind right now is like a dog whistle, right? Like you've got, if you're going to put a message out there, you've got to get somebody to turn around and say, oh, that's me. And in order to do that, when there's all this incoming, you got to be pretty specific about who you're talking to. And so that's kind of the rationale behind that. And I think, when people ask me, I'm leaving money on the table, I'm going to miss out on opportunities, all of the concerns people have when you talk about niching down, you say, look, get in and get known in a small area. And then once you're known, once people hear you in that area, you can expand. You can sell new things to the same audience. You can sell the same thing to a different audience. There's plenty of time to grow and get big. But when you're starting, that specificity is really your friend. It's on your side.
What's so funny is you were talking about you're got the forgotten generation, and Joe's a boomer and I'm a millennial. And I feel like we take over all the messaging all the time. Everybody just references our two age groups for whatever reason.
I think boomers have a branding problem at this point, at least with the millennials.
Well, I think millennials also now have a branding problem.
Well, come on, I'm Gen Xer, which is like the Karens of the world. So we have a branding problem too.
We have a major branding problem.
Oh my.
Well, when you were talking to all of these women and now with your clients, what were the mistakes you were seeing them making when they were trying to reinvent themselves?
Um, so not niching is one of them. Like I'm for everyone. Let's say this person is coming out of a corporate marketing background and they want to be a marketing consultant and they're like, "Well, I'm a marketing consultant for everyone and I do everything in marketing." Well, that not only makes you hard to hire, it makes you really hard to refer. So usually, again, when you're very first starting, your first customers aren't coming from social media. They're coming from referrals, right? They're coming from people in your network that you already know. And so if you're going to go out to people and say, "Hey, do you know anybody that might want to hire me?" You have to be really specific about who you want them to refer you to because, think about it of your own inbox, right? Somebody, comes to you and they say, "Hey, I'm starting a consulting company." And you're like, "That's awesome. And this is who I'd like to meet." If they're like, "Do you know anybody that needs marketing?" I'm like, "I don't know." And then I star the email and it gets lost in my inbox. In that moment, I need to know I help I want a marketing research job with a tech company that is 250 people or larger. Right now I can help you. Now I can say, who do I know in my network that works for that kind of a company that might need some marketing research? So niching is a big part of it. That's something that I think you don't know. That is non-obvious. So when you're starting your own company, you don't realize the impact of that. I think the second thing is they're very unclear about what they sell. And people don't buy what they don't understand. Right. And so if you're not like saying, and I'm a big advocate of like productizing your IP to the extent you can. Like, I think it's so much easier to sell a product than sell your time. So even if you want to do one-on-one kind of stuff, package it as something you do over 6 weeks and call it a program, right? So much easier to sell a thing than to sell time, to sell a transformation, actually, to use.
And don't you think you can get more money for it when you do it that way than just say, "Oh, it's it's $100 an hour." It's like, people go, "Oh, well, that's too much," or "That's okay," but nobody's sitting there going, "Wow, I'll give you more."
100%. And like, and people want to know what they're getting for that. Like, it's therapy is different, okay? But I'm talking like you need to have an outcome that you create for your clients. And so I don't want to just come and hang out with you, every 2 weeks for an undefined period of time. What am I getting out of that? So that's something else that I work with my clients on is how do you define what you're selling and how do you create a product or a program or a project around that? Because see, this works for consultants too, right? I mean, if you just copy what the big firms are doing, right? They productize their IP. That's all you're doing. And everybody can do that. Everybody has a unique approach. You just may not have figured out what yours is yet. And so that's something else I help with is kind of teasing that out. And then the third thing that I find that was just chronic with women entrepreneurs especially is they're all undercharging. And so I try to come in and say, look, this is what you are making at your job. You have this experience. They're like, oh, I need another certification or I need another degree or I need another, I'm not enough. And I'm like, bullshit. Can I say that?
Yeah, your thing.
I'm like, no, you have value, you have experience. That is worth something. You are, at the upswing your curve for your career is going up right now. So don't undervalue yourself and undercharge. But there's a lot of emotional money baggage there. So that's something else I try to help with as well.
It's funny. I actually had coffee yesterday with a gal who just turned 60, so she's right in your demographic. And she runs her own marketing firm or own marketing. She's a solopreneur. And she was like, "Yeah, I pitched this big company." And she was like, "And somebody told me to throw out 80K for this project." And she was like, "And I thought they were nuts. And I threw it out and they told me they underbid." And she was like, "Yeah. And I mean, 80K for a solopreneur, like that does sound ridiculous and again, I don't know the ins and outs of what the project entailed, but like shoot for the stars, I feel like. And if you miss, it's a learning and it'll help you better adjust as you go. Would you agree?
100%. And I think, in those situations, a lot of times, and I coach people to do this all the time, if you've got, again, if it's a referral that got you in there and you've got a friend who's in there, see if you can find out what their budget is. I mean, sometimes we can get the information we need to be able to charge appropriately. But yeah, no, you have to throw it out there, and I always say work backwards, right? How much do you want to make? How much do you want to make? And how many clients can you generally take on in a year? And this math is easier usually if you're a consultant because it's a longer term project or you're working on retainer. But you figure that out. It's just that now it's a math problem, right? How much do I want to make? How many clients can I realistically have? Divide, and that's how much you need to be charging.
Yeah. So smart. It's funny because when you say it, it's like, well, duh. But like when you're actually doing it,
But nobody thinks about it that way. And
No.
and I'll tell you why I think this. And again, I've had a lot of time to sort of mull this. But the reason I think this, I think most people have kind of a gut feeling about how much money they want to make. Like, what would make being a solopreneur worth it to you? What would make this like awesome? What would it take you to feel like, yeah, this was totally worth it. I made the right decision, right? And balance that certainly with like the impact you want to have and the flexibility you want to have. But I think people are pretty realistic. Most of my clients are pretty realistic about what they want to make. They don't close that gap between their pricing and that enough number, that gut enough number. And for some people, it's like, I want to just contribute to my kids' college education while they're in school, and that's why I'm doing this. Some people are like, I just want to be able to fly business class. Some people are there, they need to make money. They need to put food on the table. It's different for everybody, but generally most people know about what that enough number is for them. But they just don't connect it to their pricing.
But that should be like a base, a bottom, a floor for the number. That's the lowest you would charge, but you could charge.
100%.
Yeah.
But again, I'm working with people who are sort of undercharging, and there's the big gap between the two. But I agree with you. I think, you don't want to leave money on the table, especially as a solopreneur, because it does tend to be feast or famine, and you are impacted by so many external things, especially in what's going on in the general economic environment, as we can see right now.
I'm curious because obviously it's too soon to tell, right? But with everything that's happening now and all the people being laid off, I'm wondering if this isn't going to be a kind of a renaissance period for solopreneurs, because there's going to be work that needs to get done. They're not going to have the staff. A lot of these people are going to have know what to do, have been laid off, and maybe can get consulting work. I don't know. I'm wondering. It's not clear yet.
Really hard to tell. Consulting is funny because when the companies turn the spigot off, right? You can't. I mean, I've been inside the company and outside the company at those times. They turn the money spigot off and nobody can do anything, right? They stop all the travel and they stop all their hiring freezes and whatever. And so there's usually this period of fear where nothing happens. And then the work starts to pile up, right? Because of the layoffs and whatever. So there's a cycle there. And then they'll bring in consultants before they'll make a full-time hire because they're psychologically cheaper. So, I think you're right. But you can't, it's really hard to tell like when it's going to happen. And it may happen at different times with different companies. It's just, we're in such a weird cycle right now.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. This is April 2025, or first half of April 2025, and yeah, the future is very unclear. But I remember years ago, my father-in-law, he worked for Polaroid as an engineer, and they were getting into trouble, with the whole thing, and they laid him off, they let him, gave him early retirement basically, and immediately hired him back as a consultant because they could not do without. But I just, but like you say, there may be a period of time for that work to build up, but it's still possible that this could be a real opportunity in some ways for people that are prepared.
I think so. And I do think, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. If you are at a corporate job right now and you see the writing on the wall, start exploring your entrepreneurial options now. Like, don't wait until, you're laid off and you're looking at the severance check and you're watching that number drop. Go start looking now. Like, I'm sure you've got business ideas. I'm sure you've got business ideas, like something. And so, poke around in there now.
Okay. Join LifeStarr and come in and brainstorm with us. It's free.
Plug. Well, so let's say they're like, yeah, I have my business experience and that's giving me my new business ideas. And if I'm on the chopping block. Let's do this. I'm ready. So many people are in that situation and they have the best ideas, but then they come to the scary phase of entrepreneurship, which is selling. And so many people it's such a scary word for people, myself included. I do not like sales. And I know that there are like, it's not ABC anymore and close the deal and cold call. And it's changed. And I think people still think car salesman when you think of sales. Um,
Alec Baldwin in Glengarry Glen Ross. That's what they're thinking.
exactly. And it doesn't have to be like that. So how do you recommend to the women that you coach that they approach sales in a non-sleazy and more authentic way?
Yeah, yeah. Because, the thing is, I think everybody's had that one experience with a salesperson that made them uncomfortable or that they just really didn't like being in that situation. And so I think they don't want to put anybody else in that situation, certainly not someone that they'd like to have as a client. And so they go the other way, right? And so these conversations just get really awkward. So what I talk about is that if you can do some pre-work and establish yourself as an expert, and you not a world leading expert, like where you don't have to go out and win an award or anything, but you have to establish yourself as an expert in the field that you're in, because that way when you get somebody on the phone, it's not like you're trying to convince them of anything. They're already on the phone because they want to hire you. Like they already know enough about you that they want to go, yeah, I want to work with you. I use this story. So, a couple of months ago, we were at a barbecue at a friend's house, but maybe like 40 minutes away from our house. And my son was home for the summer from college and, living in our downstairs bedroom. And I get a call on the phone from my son. Now, if you all have children who are in their 20s or you know them, they don't call, right? They text me, they Discord you, they'll like get in touch with me any other way, but like they don't pick up the phone and call. My son calls. So I know this is not going to be a good thing. So I pick up the phone and he's like, Mom, there's water pouring through the light in the ceiling in the bathroom. I'm like, oh my God. So I say, all right, go turn off the water. He goes and turns off the water. I'm like, okay, we're going to come home. So I look at our friends, there are a couple other couples there. And I said, does anybody know a plumber that'll pick up the phone on the weekends? And somebody said, yeah, I know a guy. And so I took the person's number and on the way home, I called him. And let me tell you what I didn't do on that call. I did not ask him, how his program worked. I didn't ask him how many years he had been a plumber. I didn't actually even ask him how much he charged. I was like, can you be at my house today? And he's like, yes, I can be there at 3:00. I'm like, great, you're hired. So what we all do is a little bit different, and you were usually not solving quite a problem that urgent. If you can find a problem that urgent, it's a great way to stay employed. But it's that idea that if you can establish yourself as an expert in your field, then it becomes a path to you getting hired. And the way I think the best way to establish yourself as an expert of your field is to use thought leadership content.
Yeah. So, okay. You talk about there's a way to develop kind of a content generating machine for yourself that, and here's the big kicker, doesn't include ChatGPT. And I'm like, that's false. All of our content ideas come from ChatGPT now. So what is the tool that you use or the methodology that you use?
Well, honestly, it's belief shifting content. So you can still use ChatGPT if you want to, but that download I have has all these prompts in it, not for ChatGPT for you, but if you want to involve ChatGPT in that situation, go right ahead. You can certainly use it with it. But you've got to walk people through your process and through the belief shifts it takes to become a buyer, right? And buyer psychology is well documented. This is not, I didn't come up with this yesterday, right? We know that people have to kind of come along before they decide to make a purchase from you. So if we had sort of the first stage of that, it would be awareness, right? They need to understand they have a problem and they need to understand that you understand their problem, right? And then the second thing that we kind of have to convince them of is there's a solution and there are options. And so that gives them some hope. Oh, well, wait a minute, maybe there is a way that I can fix this problem. Then the third thing is trust. right? We need them to believe that we can help them. And that's where your testimonials and your case studies come in. That's where you can talk about your experience and those kinds of, or your education and those kinds of things. Um, they have to understand how your thing works. People don't buy what they don't understand, right? So they need to understand what process or what's going to happen to them if they work with you. And they also need to believe that they can succeed using whatever your solution is, right? And then the final piece is what I call selfie content, but I don't mean like taking pictures of yourself. I mean, it's that personality, chemistry, fit belief. They need to vibe with you, right? And so that's where you really need to share like your mission or your values or your hobbies. I mean, you don't necessarily need to tell them everything you've ever done, but you know what I mean. You can let them in to some extent because I don't know who said this, but people don't buy coaching, they buy coaches, right? People don't buy consulting, they buy consultants. You really got to like somebody that you're working with. And this, and that all comes down to it's the Bob Berg quote, right? The know, like, trust, right? So all of this belief shifting, all of this proof content, all of this letting them know a little bit more about you personally, each piece of that builds on that know, like, trust. And it's a really authentic way that you can market yourself and sell yourself without feeling like you're always asking somebody, do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy this?
I'm so glad you brought that up because some people, when you talk about content or establishing your business and separating it from the masses, a lot of people are taking the same advice. So they're creating the content, they're getting the testimonials, blah, blah, blah. And they're kind of like, okay, but so is the marketing consultant next to me, and the marketing consultant over there is doing the same thing. And gosh, like, how do I differentiate myself? And that's it. It's the connection. It's the do you vibe? And because it's so true. And I mean, we throughout our careers, we've worked with different contractors, and you know pretty quickly if you vibe with them or not. Like it I feel like that's the biggest telling factor, at least for me, compared to their credentials and everything else, their experience. And I do think that that's something that people miss out on.
And I think it has to be the whole package, right? And I think in addition to the vibe, like I do think that people need to believe that you know what you're talking about. And I do think an additional way to differentiate yourself from the marketing consultant sitting next to you is to have your own approach. And we were talking a little bit this earlier in terms of like, um, productizing your IP, right? Everybody should have their own approach to doing stuff, right? Through your experience and through the, I don't know, what works, right? Otherwise, you really shouldn't be being a coach or consultant. And so your approach is actually an excellent differentiator that the person next to you should not have. And so you can break that down into tons of content. You can say, I use these assessments, or I use these checklists, or this is my framework, or I know this works because step 1 does this, and step 2 does that, and step 3 does that. And so you walk them through your steps, which should not be the same as anybody else's steps. And I do think that's a great way to differentiate and help people remember you.
Mhm. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, Laura, this is also helpful. And I think it's also, I like you guys were just saying, there is so much uncertainty right now. And I feel like the way that you're describing all of this kind of gives people hope, and especially women, Gen X women, that it's like, it's okay. Like, and it's the other funny thing is, I feel like people should be thinking about this on the side anyway, because regardless of the time that we're in, salaries are kind of a false safety net too. You could get fired at any minute.
Yeah,
So
for
just
sure.
always thinking about like what your unique selling point is, your experience, your values. I think it's just a good reminder to walk yourself through this, whether you've jumped ship from corporate or not. And we get people listening to the podcast who are on both ends. We have people that are in the solopreneur world now, and people that are like, I want to get there. I just need to figure out how to do that. And I just think everything you've said today is just so reassuring for people and kind of gives them the confidence to take that leap. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh,
Um,
well, I hope it does do that.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So you help people, you help women specifically, Gen Xers, find success with whatever their new adventure is. So we ask all of our guests this question: what is your favorite quote about success?
Um, if you follow all the rules, you'll miss all the fun. And Katharine Hepburn said that.
Then I am missing a lot of fun. I am your traditional rule follower.
I am so not a rule follower. Oh my gosh.
I had a friend ask me the other day. She was like, or she goes, "Let's bring our dogs to this coffee shop." And I was like, was it dog friendly? And she goes, "Well, I don't know. I just assumed so. Let's just bring the dogs." And in my mind, I was like, unless there's a written sign or a note, like the manager agrees, I'm not going. And she was just like, "Oh, just bring the dogs."
I'm always like, oh, those rules are for other people. That cross at the light thing, that's for other people. I'm just going to cross over here.
Well, and that's what makes you a good solopreneur. So, Laura, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
The best place is to go to my website. It's at laurazavelson.com, and I'm going to spell that. Laura, Z as in zebra, A, V as in victory, ELSON.com. I am the only Laura Zavelson, so if you Google that, everything that comes up will be related to me. And I actually have a YouTube channel. And so if you want more thoughts about how to start or grow your coaching and consulting business, you can find me on YouTube.
Easy enough. Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming on the show. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. But you know what? We love putting out this content for you. It's one of our favorite parts of our week. But in return, we would love that 5-star review. It's how we get found in search more easily. It's how we grow that show. And we want to continue putting this on for you. So be sure to leave that 5-star review, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, as well as YouTube. And we will see you next time on The Aspiring Solopreneur.